But what I was going to make an analogy, draw a simile, a comparison, if you will. The Archies and the Monkeys, is that what we've got with wrestling these days, or we're about to have with wrestling these days, especially with the WWE, if what we're going to talk about them later on comes to pass? Don Kirshner just said, you know what? These rock stars, they're too goddamn hard to deal with. I'm just going to make my own band. And then when he made his own band, but they got hard to deal with, he said, it. I'm just going to make them all cartoon characters. And then I can draw them into doing whatever I want to. And he got a #1 fucking record out of a fucking cartoon band. Is that what the end goal of the WWE is, especially now? Just get some fucking people to voice these characters. If they can, we're going to talk about the betting later on. If they can do that and they can figure out a way to computer generate these son of a bitches, then wrestling is going to be the equivalent of the Archies in 1969. The real human beings were too hard to deal with, and we couldn't minimize their involvement enough, so now we have just taken them out of it, and we're going to create our own fucking wrestlers.
You know, with Don Kirshner, he came out of the Brill Building. He was there before the Beatles. He was there after the Beatles. This is that period of time, the end of the Beatles, after the Beatles. So again, here's a guy whose business as a publisher was getting his songs published. The singer-songwriter, the bands writing their own songs were a problem.
Yeah.
Some of them still covered stuff, but it was something that was decreasing. And when you have a manufactured band, you're guaranteed that they'll play your songs. And then when they rebel against you, you just have them drawn. I mean, that's what it is.
Or redrawn, as the case may be. And that's, I think that's what they're going for, at least in the WWE now, because, I mean, have you ever seen a time where there in the WWE in history, from the territory days, 60s, 70s, Vince taking over in the 80s, Attitude Era of the 90s, even 2000s, where there were only a couple of legitimate main event guys and everybody else was on the same par with each other and just kind of fucking taking turns wrestling each other every week? So I think, you know, and the stars that they have made are aging rapidly. So do we expect Sugar in the next 8 years, the new champion? Here he is. We've just created him. He's your computer generated hero.
You know, that's the thing too. God. Like, you know, again, taking your thoughts or feelings about him as a person or a performer out of it, with Kenny Omega, former AEW champion. Let's say WWE does sign him. He's not a kid. This isn't someone you can look at like, yeah, this is a great future investment. This is an investment in right now, hopefully for a little bit.
He just took 9 months off having multiple surgeries to correct previous injuries, and he's almost 40. So at this point, and I'm not even saying this to knock him, but the WWE, if he was not in a prominent position on the other guy's program, wouldn't offer him a contract because they've turned down people younger and in better shape because of age and injuries, previous injuries. But they will offer him a contract because he's on the other program, so they can do some damage to them. At this point, in the days where Vince had to personally approve the amount of money that each wrestler got, and those days are not that long ago, no, there's no way that they would have, you know, offered him big money at this stage in his life. But now that the money doesn't really matter because it's not big money anymore in their overall multi-billion-dollar scheme of things, they'll probably offer him a significant amount of money for 3 years to take him away from the other guys and to ensure that by the time he would ever go back to the other guys, if they're still around at that point, he'd be almost in his mid-40s and certainly in not better physical condition than he is now after taking 3 more years of any kind of bumps. So that's it. When they used to have to watch out for what they spent in terms of talent payments, talent salaries, they might not have been so gung-ho to get him because it wouldn't have been worth it in the long run. It would have upset other people in the locker room. But now that it's a negligible amount of money to them, then there's that. Well, yeah, we'll just take him out of that equation and see how they do. They don't even have to use him. They don't have to justify the salary. We used to have to. I've heard the phrase from Vince and/or Jim Ross directed at anybody on the creative team: justify the salary. They don't have to anymore. They can just leave them sit home, send them a check, and they don't even notice.
And with Omega, like I said, this, to your point, it's about developing stars, and they are thin at the top and everyone's getting older. That's a case of if you sign someone who is a star to a portion of the audience, they're old, so you really can't make it a long-term investment. More than likely, other than MJF, who knows if he'll ever leave AEW? And I hate to play that game because that game's going to be going on over and over again for a while. So other than him, is there anyone under 30 that would actually be an impactful signing from WWE or by WWE? When Chris Jericho signed there, I don't even think he was 30 yet. So he had a good run in WCW. I loved his run in WCW. And then he had a long run in WWE and came back several times. He was young enough that he was able to do that. Is there anyone they actually could sign under 30 that they wouldn't just throw in NXT and treat like crap for a few years? That could actually come up there.
Oh, okay. Now you put a qualifier in that drastically even reduces that number.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have. Yeah. Well, that's my question.
Well, there's almost nobody anywhere that they could just sign and bring straight to the main roster without NXT, except, and right now, again, you don't want to play the game with MJF, but they couldn't sign him right now because he's the champion. He's under contract. Whether in next year, 2024, or whatever, he's still under 30. And they could still, he would. I certainly to God would have hoped that they wouldn't send him to NXT because you've got the chance there to, have a guy that's been the world champion from the other company, the only other company practically.
No, there's no way they would bring him up and he'd be an impact player on the main roster. You couldn't.
Well, I mean, stupid things happen all the time, but yeah, you would have to think that crossover because they're getting a guy that's so that really doesn't need to be taught anything. They need to learn some things from him. But otherwise than that, I was going to say, how old is Hobbs? But he needs to go to NXT. Anybody under 30 in AEW, with the exception of MJF, it would be a disservice not to send them to NXT because they've gotten varying degrees of training in whatever indies they've come from. And maybe they've had some good influences, but they would certainly have to learn how a professional organization is booked and the TV is presented, if nothing else.
Hobbs is 32.
Yeah. Well, but it matters not. We could sit here and go through the list, but I can't think of anybody off the top of my head that from AEW under 30 that shouldn't go to NXT. Anyway, so that, but I was going to read this, but fuck it. Now that you've made mockery of me for other things, I'm going to save this for next week.
Well, what's that? Hold on. What is that?
No.